Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Had a couple of funerals, yes?
Yes, I did. One yesterday and one today.
Do you need to know the person that you're going to officiate when it comes to a funeral?
Ideally, it would be great to know that person personally, but very often you can't do that when you're working in a church. As a matter of fact, many of the churches around Detroit, we would have maybe 3-4 funerals a week, and so that you have to be on standby to take one or another. In any case, what I like to do, though, is sit down with 2, 3, or 4 members of the family, and I actually divide my little meeting with them into the first part is mechanical, who's going to bring up the gifts at the offertory, and who's going to do the prayer of the faithful, and who will do the first reading, and so on and so forth. And what readings are we going to choose, and who's going to write up the prayer of the faithful, and so on. I call that the mechanical part. Mm-hmm. But then what I do, I go around the table, especially if there's more than one person present. I go around the table asking each one, in a few words, maybe 3 at most, what do you think of John? And so they'll come up inevitably with something that stands out in their minds about John. After we've done that little exercise, then we work with going a little bit in depth on some of the things that they said. For example, if they say, well, John was really one of the most generous people you want to meet, well, in what way can you describe that? And so on and so forth. And people will go a little bit deep into that. So after about an hour and a half or so, you feel that you have a good sense of who that person is, and you have enough information that you could actually create something that would be meaningful to the family and the friends of the people that attend the funeral.
Isn't that a lot of work?
It's a lot of work, but it's also very rewarding. Okay. See, a funeral could also be a teaching moment, because many of the people that come to the funeral are not practicing. But yet, if we explain things in a proper way, and if we are able to deal with the personality of the individual who died, and how he or she really tried to practice a religion, I mean, we all muddle along, let's face it. We do the best we can. We fall, we pick ourselves up, and move forward. But in any case, very often people can relate more easily if they hear it about someone that they know and that they love. And we see how this person muddles through his or her life.
You have to come across that situation where people are so incredibly sad. How difficult is that?
One of the things I try to practice anyway, when I run into a situation like that, I think it's very important to shut up, right? Mm-hmm. The more words we try to say to console, the worse it comes out. They don't need that. They need your presence. They need somebody there to be with them, to support them. And also, I mean, it's one of these things that God has abandoned me. Well, God has not abandoned you. If you look at all of the different people who have come to your support and to your aid, it's because God has prompted them to come to you. God works through human beings. They're not going to, it's the situation that's miraculous where God intervenes directly is highly, highly unusual. God works through other human beings, whether they're family members, loved ones, good friends, and so on. The initial reaction, I think, should be to listen, see what you can do. In some cases, it's good to just be there. You don't have to say anything. Your presence really gives the support that that person needs.
But you had a couple of funerals this week where people in their late 80s and well into their 90s have passed. Those can be celebrations, truly celebrations, can't they?
And they usually are, because you're celebrating a person's very, very long and happy life.
Yeah. Let's go to the lighter side of Father Joe. What is your favorite thing to do as a priest in terms of ceremonies?
Oh, ceremonies?
Yeah.
Wow. Any of the major liturgies are just spectacular when you have everything, the bells and whistles and the incense, all the smoke and all of that kind of stuff. That's always very much energizing. And you have a beautiful choir and the whole bit. Ordinarily, you have the reaction of the ordinary congregation to whatever you do and say. And that is very, very rewarding for the priest, I believe.
One of the things I think the Catholic Church could do, should do, and I think they're starting to do, is to incorporate some good music into the actual Mass.
It is starting to do it. I think they've done it all along. When you visit the various countries in the world, you find that very often the culture is very much part of the celebration. I remember in Honolulu, one of my jobs was what they called the Vicar General. And here I was in the office, and I get this phone call, and this woman calls up and says, I went to the church for Mass, and what did I see but nightclub dancing? They call it the hula. It was nightclub dancing. And I says, Madam, you go to church to pray, not to look at who's doing what. But anyway,
I bet she was saying, I wish I could do that. That's my thought.
But the explanation, of course, is that every culture has its own way of showing worship. And, for example, if you see some of the masses that the Holy Father presides over in Africa, you see all of the what we might look at as very wild music and people jumping and so on and so forth. We might be a little bit taken back because in the United States, we're somewhat sedate.
I think sometimes too sedate, to be honest with you.
Could be. You don't want to show the exuberance that we should have towards worshiping Almighty God.
All right, can the priest then say to his particular congregation, let's have a meeting, and you tell me what you would like to see different at a Mass without changing any part of the actual purpose of the Mass? Can we bring in guitars, and can we bring in drums, and can we do the music that way? Would you ever host a meeting like that?
Oh, I think that's ideal. I think most parishes try to do that. This is not something that's so outlandish. Yeah. As long as we're within keeping with the culture of the people, there's a time and a place for everything. You want that beautiful choir that resonates and you think you're in the middle of some symphony hall.
Exactly.
That's one thing. But you also want some of the other where you have the folk music and the guitars and the banjos and so on and so forth. It depends on the actual situation. I know that one of the churches in town, they really do a lot of work in trying to make the Mass relevant to young people. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say young people, I mean people between 15 and 35 or 40. It includes that whole group. And so they will pick out certain music that's appropriate, that certainly is in keeping with the liturgy, but by the same token, you know that because of the way it sounds and the words, the way they're written, do relate to these people a lot better than Amazing Grace, okay?
Right.
So it's and nothing wrong with Amazing Grace. It's just that it's for a different time and a different people. You need a little bit of diversity.
What you said was important because you're talking about demographics at that point. And I know a lot about demographics because of radio. You've got your 6+ overall, your entire audience. You also have the 18 to 24, the 24 to 35. You've got the 25 to 54, your 54 plus. So you're going to have various sanctions within the community in that church that are going to push back on some of the more radical ideas, don't you think?
You certainly are. I mean, one of the things that the Archbishop of Detroit has been proposing loud and clear is unleashing the gospel. And unleashing the gospel means you have to be relevant to the people that you're addressing. So you can't, it's not one size fits all. It doesn't. So you have to relate to the people that you're addressing. And so unleashing the gospel means that you bring in the culture for this particular group or that particular group, in my mind anyway. Unleashing the gospel means to try to evangelize people who have kind of all of a sudden they're sitting back and, okay, you entertain me. People have to be involved in their worship and their faith in order to get something out of it. If they're not involved, you can dance and do whatever you want. It's not going to affect them. I like the idea of the way you worded it anyway, the various audiences of the radio, huh?
Uh-huh.
I think we have to use that technique in the way we present the liturgy to the people.
Well, you mentioned it, and that's why I've been thinking about it since you mentioned it,
Yeah.
how the two cultures clashed at first. I think it was in Corralitos, California,
Yes.
where you were talking about the mariachis. Here are these people that have the land, but they need the Mexicans to pick to pick the grapes and to pick the fruit. But they wanted nothing to do with them, yet they shared something in common. They were both Christians, Catholics. They both went to Mass, but not
together.
Not in my house, until they all of a sudden got together and said, "This is fun. Maybe I could help you out there."
No, I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it. But you see, I think this is the way I interpret what the Archbishop is saying. He wants to address the way we practice our worship in the various churches. Huh? He wants to address the very things that you've mentioned. How are we going to reach this culture? How are we going to reach that culture? And what are we going to do about it? And I think this is part of what he means and when he says unleash the gospel.
I got to tell you, I love sitting down and talking to you. Father Joe Grimaldi, my name's Ken Calvert, and I was talking with a friend of mine today at lunch, and I was telling him about the podcast. He said, "Tell me more about the podcast." I said, "I realize that Father Joe Grimaldi is a compelling, wonderful guy who has great stories, great faith, and I just enjoy doing it." And he said, "I got a question for him. Ask him if I can literally build on my existing Christianity." I said, "Are you talking about like going to a gym where you would build on a muscle, where you start and that's where you are? Maybe a month later you can see some improvement." Does my analogy, metaphor, if you will, make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. For example, I think if we want to improve our relationship with the Lord, I think that's what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it involves meditation. And, we say, well, how can I meditate? I can't just sit there and meditate. Well, because people are trying to do the unreachable. If we spend maybe 3 minutes today in meditation, and what does this relationship mean? Is it based on Scripture? Isn't it? And so on and so forth. And tomorrow, you can easily go into 5 minutes, and then the following day, and that to me is like an exercise that helps you build up your spirituality. You go deeper and deeper into the relationship that you have with the Lord. Obviously, reading good spiritual materials helps as well. Huh? So, and speaking to people who are knowledgeable, that can help you along as well. Just like you have a coach when you go to a gym, a trainer if you want. Well, there are trainers too, spiritual advisors that can help you. So it can be done. It is being done. It takes discipline to say, well, I'm going to pick a perfect spot where I know I can be quiet. And it could be in the middle of your backyard. It could be in a nice garden. It could be in the church. It could be in front of the Blessed Sacrament. So there are all sorts of places where you can be. That would be the physical aspect of it. But the meditation at first seems, I don't think I can sit there for 15 minutes. Well, in the beginning you can't. But I think with time, that 2 minutes that you spend today could become 20 minutes next month or whatever the case might be.
Are church doors open during the day?
In many places, yes. Not in all, unfortunately,
Right.
Because, well, I think you know why.
I do, but there was a time many, many years ago when they were open 24 hours a day.
Correct, but not anymore. You can't do that.
Right. I was going to ask you about weddings. And is that one of those situations that you enjoy? Do you enjoy doing a ceremony? And do you insist upon knowing the people that you're going to marry?
Whenever you're doing a wedding, I think it's important that you're involved at least in some way in the preparation for that wedding, so that the young it doesn't have to be young, but usually it's a young couple that's preparing for marriage. Now, what I think is extremely important is that they take that preparation seriously. The reason I say that, we have so many divorces today. Part of the reason, very often, is that people are thinking about the ceremony, the physical, beautiful looking church, the right color flowers, what are they going to serve at the country club, who are we inviting and who's going to sit where, and so on. They're forgetting that their time together should be spent on finding out, can I live with this person for the rest of my life?
But you sit down and explain that to them, right? Like you say to them, guys, what we're doing here tomorrow is so incredibly special. Please don't worry about the photographers. Don't worry about the weather. Don't worry about the people. Don't worry about the country club, the flowers, and the food. But worry about the actual ceremony, because in 10 years, I want you to rely on this ceremony and not on the peripheral items that you're concentrating on, instead of really realizing what the vows of matrimony are all about, because you are going to need to lean on those 10, 15, 20 years from now.
You've said it beautifully, I think. The preparation period, by the way, is usually a 6-month period where you meet periodically with the couple. They do an instrument. I call it an instrument. An example of that would be something called focus. And in that instrument, we discuss, or they try to answer, a battery of questions that have to do with, finances, with communication, all of those items that cause red flags later on. And then, once we get the results of that instrument, if you want, that battery of questions, then we're able to sit down and see where they agree, where they disagree. And there's nothing wrong in disagreeing. What's important is that they know why they disagree. The other thing I find is this, that the preparation can't be just a one-time deal. Each time you meet with that couple, you emphasize the different aspects, their relationship, their intimacy, their financial situation, and so on and so forth.
Regarding the situation, the 6-month, the prep, and all of that, have you ever looked at a couple and said, how do I say this without...
Yes, I have. I think I know what you're going to say.
Have you ever said they should not be getting married?
I did.
You did?
Yes. I refused to marry them.
No kidding.
This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.